The light from the Cygnus anomaly did not travel in a straight line. It seeped, bleeding into the void like ink into water. And where it touched, reality frayed. On the main observation deck of the conquered spire, which pierced the crystalline skies of the capital world Xylos, representatives from 100 star-faring civilizations watched the anomaly's latest victim die. It was the flagship of the Kelmorian technocracy, the Starweaver, a vessel whose hull was not forged but sung into existence, its shields a harmonized frequency of space-time itself. Before the light of the Ethel, it simply unraveled. There was no explosion, no brilliant flash of dying energies. One moment, the ship was a kilometer-long sliver of perfect, iridescent technology, a testament to 10,000 years of evolution. The next, it was a cloud of disconnected atoms, its song silenced, its crew's consciousness dissolving back into the universe's background radiation. The silence in the spire was heavier than a dying star. Lyra Ventari, the prime arbiter of the conquered and a being of coherent, shimmering energy contained within a crystalline humanoid frame, floated at the center of the chamber. Its voice was not sound but a direct telepathic resonance that vibrated in the mind of every delegate. The Fifth Fleet is gone. The Ethel advanced toward the periphery worlds. Our reality anchors failed. Our energy nullification fields were absorbed. Every weapon we have deployed has been dismantled before it could reach its target. We are facing an enemy that does not fight. It merely unmakes. At the very edge of the assembled delegates, far from the central podium where beings of immense age and power conversed, stood Dr. Eris Thorne. He was the sole human representative on the Concord's Science and Defense Council, a position that was largely ceremonial. Humanity was the galactic equivalent of an unkempt teenager who had just stumbled out of their bedroom into a formal gala. They were loud. They used messy solid fuel rockets for far too long, and their technology was a chaotic jumble of brute force solutions. They were considered a curiosity, a race with more ambition than grace, and their presence in the Concord was tolerated mostly for their surprising tenacity in asteroid mining and their ability to colonize worlds most other species considered inhospitable death traps. Eris felt the weight of 100 alien minds brushing against his own, a constant murmur of pity and condescension. He was a physicist by trade, not a diplomat. And he clutched the data slate in his hand so tightly his knuckles were white. He wore a simple dark gray Terran uniform that seemed drab and utilitarian compared to the flowing energy fields and shimmering biological carapaces of the others. He looked like a janitor who had wandered into a conclave of gods, a delegate from the Silith Collective, a towering insectoid whose thoughts felt like chitons scraping against glass, projected towards Lyra Ventari. Prime Arbiter, we must consolidate our forces. The periphery is lost. We must protect the core. The Ethels seem to be drawn to high-energy signatures. Our fleets, our worlds, they are beacons. We must fall back and devise a new strategy. Eris knew what that meant. The periphery included New Magellan, one of humanity's oldest and most populous colony worlds. To the conquered, it was a negligible loss, a primitive outpost on the galactic map. To humanity, it was 5 billion souls. His own sister was stationed there, a xenobotanist studying the strange, crystalline flora of the planet. Lyra Ventari's form pulsed with somber light. That is the logical course of action. We cannot afford to waste more assets on futile defenses. The Ethel do not conquer. They erase. We cannot reason with them. We can only hope to outthink them. This was his cue. Ambassador Rostova's final orders had been cold and clear. They will abandon us. Aris. When they do, you make them listen. He swallowed. the simple biological act feeling crude and loud in the silent chamber. He took a hesitant step forward, and the collective attention of the conquered, a force that could buckle minds, fell upon him. His own thoughts felt small and fragile under their gaze. "Prime Arbiter," he began, his voice amplified by the room's translation matrix. It sounded thin, reedy. "Humanity has a proposal." A ripple of something akin to amusement flowed through the chamber. The Gathar delegate, a squat, amphibious being floating in a personal suspension tank, gurgled a thought that leaked into the open psychic space. The primitives wished to speak. "Should we fetch them a sharpened stick?" Eris ignored it, focusing on the shimmering form of Lyra Ventari. "We have been studying the Ethel's methodology of deconstruction," he said, his words gaining a bit of strength. "You are correct that they are drawn to high-energy signatures. They seem to feed on complex energy, unraveling it, absorbing it. Our model suggests that our shields and energy weapons are not just ineffective, they are actively powering our enemy." Lyra Ventari's light softened, a sign of polite but dismissive curiosity. "Your point." Dr. Thorne. "This is a conclusion our finest minds reached cycles ago." "My point," Eris said, tapping his data slate and sending a file to the main holographic display, "is that you have been trying to fight fire with a more elegant fire. We propose not using fire at all." The image that appeared in the center of the room caused a wave of confusion, followed by outright disgust. It was a ship, but it was the ugliest vessel any of them had ever seen. It was not sleek or elegant. It was a brutalist nightmare of sharp angles, thick plates of gray, unadorned metal, and a massive spinal chasm running down its length. It looked less like a starship and more like a city block that had been ripped from the ground and fitted with colossal engines. It was an affront to every principle of starship design refined over the last 50 millennia. "This is the D.S. Tungsten," Eris explained, his throat dry. "The first of our Chimera-class dreadnoughts. It has no energy shielding. Its hull is a composite of tungsten, carbon nanotubes, and a synthetic crystalline lattice, layered over 200 meters thick in critical sections. It is designed not to deflect an attack, but to endure it, to simply be too dense and too inert for the Ethel's deconstruction wave to gain purchase." The Silith delegate's thoughts were sharp with scorn. "You intend to weather a storm that can unmake suns by hiding behind a thick rock. The sheer arrogance is impressive." Eris braced himself. "The armor is only half of the solution. As you can see, the tungsten lacks plasma cannons, laser emitters, or any form of energy-based weaponry. Its primary armament is a Mark 7 mass accelerator cannon." He highlighted the massive spine of the ship. "We call it a MAC. It uses a series of superconductive magnetic coils, miles long, to accelerate a 20-ton ferrous tungsten slug to a significant fraction of the speed of light." He paused, letting the grotesque simplicity of the concept sink in. "We are going to throw rocks at it. Very, very fast rocks." For a moment, there was nothing but stunned silence. Then, a wave of laughter rolled through the chamber. It was not a sound of mirth, but of pure, unrestrained mockery. It echoed in Eris's mind, a chorus of ancient, powerful beings finding the desperate flailings of a lesser species utterly hilarious. The Gathar delegate was vibrating so hard its tank bubbled. "They have rediscovered the slingshot," Humanity's finest minds have reinvented the catapult. The Silith delegate clicked its mandibles in derision. A kinetic projectile against a non-corporeal, reality-altering phenomenon. You would be better off shouting insults at it. Human. It would be just as effective and far less pathetic. Lyra Ventari itself seemed to dim, a gesture of profound disappointment. Dr. Thorne, we appreciate the effort, but the Concord does not deal in barbarism. Your proposal is an insult to the very nature of evolved warfare. We are not savages hurling stones in the dark. We are the pinnacle of galactic intellect. Your solution is rejected. Eris felt a cold knot of anger and fear tighten in his stomach. He had expected this, but the reality of it was still a physical blow. He looked at the holographic display of the Ethel anomaly, a beautiful, swirling cancer that was steadily advancing toward his sister's world. It is not a solution based on intellect, Eris said, his voice dropping to a low, intense register. It is based on physics. The Ethel deconstruct complex energy systems, but there is nothing complex about kinetic energy. It is the universe's simplest, most brutal truth. It is mass and velocity. It cannot be absorbed or unraveled. It can only be endured. We do not believe the Ethel can endure a 20-ton slug moving at 0.95 light speed. The sheer physical force of the impact would not just be a weapon, it would be a violation of the localized reality they are trying to manipulate. It would be an event so physically absolute that their quantum tricks would be irrelevant. The laughter had stopped. Eris's raw, desperate conviction had silenced it, but the mockery had been replaced by a cold, hard pity. Your theory is novel, human. Lyra Ventari projected, its tone final. But the Conquered will not sanction such a primitive, reckless gamble. The periphery fleets will be recalled to form a defensive cordon around the core worlds. We are sorry for your colony, but its sacrifice will save trillions. That was it. The final, polite dismissal. The death sentence for New Magellan, delivered with a gentle apology. From the back of the chamber, a human woman in a severe black diplomatic uniform strode forward. Ambassador Eva Rostova. Her face was granite, her eyes chips of ice. She didn't look at Arius, but addressed the Arbiter directly, her translated voice cutting through the chamber like diamond. Prime Arbiter Lyra Ventari, by the powers vested in me by the Terran Confederacy, I hereby inform the Concord that as per Article 17, Section 4 of the Concordance Accords, humanity is invoking the clause of existential sovereignty. We view the Concord's refusal to defend a member world and its denial of our proposed defensive measures as a direct and immediate threat to the survival of our species. A shocked hush fell over the delegates. The clause had not been invoked in 1,000 years. It was a relic of a more chaotic era, a legal tool for secession. Rostova continued, her voice unwavering, effective immediately. The Terran Confederacy secedes from the Galactic Concord. All Terran personnel are recalled. All trade and resource agreements are null and void. We are on our own. Lyra Ventari's form flared with brilliant, angry light. Ambassador, you are making a catastrophic mistake. Your species cannot survive alone. You will be erased. Rostova gave a thin, cold smile. We were born alone in the dark. Arbiter, we are used to it. She turned to Eris. Doctor, your work is done here. A transport is waiting. As Eris followed his ambassador from the chamber, the weight of 100 alien minds pressed on him, no longer with mockery, but with a cold, clinical certainty. They were watching a dead man walk. They were observing a species marching proudly to its own extinction. Hours later, Eris was strapped into the acceleration couch of a Terran diplomatic courier, the ship's engines whining as they prepared for the jump back to the Sol system. The Concorde spire was a glittering needle of light in the viewport, a monument to an ancient, elegant galaxy that had no place for humanity's crude, violent ideas. He held his data slate, staring at the schematics of the tungsten. It was waiting for him, hidden in the dark docks of the Kuiper Belt. For years, it had been a theoretical exercise, a series of equations and simulations born from a desperate, outside-the-box thought experiment. He had theorized that in a universe of scalpels, the only thing that might work was a sledgehammer. Now, the theory was over. The sledgehammer was real, and he, a quiet physicist who had once dreamed of mapping nebulae, was the one who had to tell the military how to swing it. He felt a profound sense of dread, a cold certainty that even if his calculations were right, even if the Mac gun worked and the monstrous ship saved them all, the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. They would no longer be the loud, awkward teenagers. They would be the ones who brought the ugly, brutal, undeniable truth of physical violence back into a civilized age. He closed his eyes, thinking of his sister on New Magellan, and whispered a prayer to whatever god of physics might be listening, a prayer that he was right, and a deeper, more terrible prayer that he was wrong. The journey back to the Sol system was a silent, compressed eternity. Eris Thorne spent the time not in sleep, but in a frantic, obsessive review of his own calculations, searching for the fatal flaw, the single misplaced decimal that would render his theories and, by extension, the entire human race obsolete. He found none. That was what scared him the most. The courier dropped out of hyperspace in the shadow of a behemoth, a dark smear against the distant tapestry of the Milky Way. The Kuiper Belt was humanity's hidden shipyard, a junkyard kingdom of ice and rock where the Confederacy built the things it didn't want the rest of the galaxy to see. And the TDS. Tungsten was its crown jewel of ugliness. Seeing it on a data slate was one thing. Witnessing it in person was a fundamentally unnerving experience. It did not reflect the sparse starlight. It devoured it. The hull was a chaotic patchwork of enormous gunmetal gray plates, scarred with the burns and stresses of its shakedown trials. There were no graceful curves, no aesthetic considerations, only brutal function. It was a weapon that was unashamed of its purpose. A magnetic grapple latched onto the courier, pulling it into a cavernous docking bay that felt less like a part of a starship and more like a subterranean mining facility. The air tasted of ozone and recycled metal. As Eris disembarked, his boots clanging on the grated decking, he was met not by a diplomatic attaché, but by a man who seemed to be carved from the same material as the ship itself. Admiral Horrocks was a mountain in a navy blue uniform, his face a roadmap of old radiation burns and his eyes the color of a stormy sea. He offered no handshake, only a curt nod. "Dr. Thorne, you made good time. The eggheads at High Command said you were the only man in the galaxy who could calibrate this monstrosity." Jorik's voice was a low rumble, like rocks grinding together. "I hope for all our sakes they're right." He turned and began walking, forcing Eris to hurry to keep pace. The interior of the tungsten was a labyrinth of reinforced steel corridors, thick conduits, and exposed structural supports. There were no viewing ports, no art, no comforts. Every inch was dedicated to survival and destruction. The crew they passed were not the crisp, polished officers of the conquered. They were engineers and technicians with grease on their faces and a weary, focused intensity in their eyes. They looked like the men and women who worked oil rigs or deep-core mines, people comfortable with loud noises and the constant threat of violent death. The bridge was not the open, Holographic chamber of a conquered vessel, but a cramped, armored citadel buried deep within the ship's core. Screens flickered with raw data streams, reactor outputs, gravitational stresses, ammunition counts. It was a war room, not a command center. The Conquered has officially declared us a rogue state, Jorik said, gesturing to a tactical display showing the Sol system ringed in a soft, cautionary red. They've issued a travel advisory for all Terran space, as if we're some sort of plague. They think we're committing suicide. And he turned his gaze to Eris, and the full weight of his authority seemed to press down on the scientist. Convince me we're not. Eris took a deep breath, stepping forward to a terminal and calling up his own files. Admiral, the Ethel are a form of sentient, weaponized entropy. They don't use force. They use a targeted deconstruction of complex energy states. Everything the Conquered builds, their phase shields, their plasma cannons, their crystalline hulls is a monument to complex energy. They're ringing a dinner bell. The tungsten is the opposite. It is a monument to inertia. It is, in the simplest terms, the most stubbornly real object we could build. The hull is designed to absorb the deconstruction wave, its sheer density and layered, non-reactive structure giving the Ethel nothing to unravel. It will endure damage, catastrophic damage even, but it will not cease to exist. It will force the Ethel to deal with a concept their entire existence has allowed them to ignore brute physical reality. Jorik grunted, his eyes fixed on the schematics of the ship. The armor is a fine theory, Doctor, but a shield that doesn't break is just a coffin if you can't fight back. Tell me about the gun. Eris switched the display, showing a cross-section of the ship's massive spinal cannon. The mass accelerator cannon is not a gun in the traditional sense. It's a controlled catastrophe. The main reactor's entire output is shunted into a series of capacitor banks that run the length of the ship. On your command, that energy is discharged in a precise sequence into the magnetic coils. The projectile, a 20-ton spike of compressed tungsten and depleted uranium, is accelerated from a dead stop to 95% of the speed of light in less than a second. The G-forces involved would liquefy any known material, so the slug is held in a temporary stasis field that collapses the instant it clears the barrel. He looked up from the screen, meeting the Admiral's hard gaze. When that slug hits a target, it's not an explosion. It is an extinction-level event delivered to a single point. The kinetic energy is so immense, it will overwhelm any shield, any material. But more importantly, against the Ethel, it introduces an absolute physical event into their quantum operational space. It's like trying to run a complex quantum computer while a sledgehammer is smashing the motherboard. The physics of the impact are too loud, too simple, too absolute. It should, theoretically, cause their deconstruction field to collapse in on itself. Jorik was silent for a long time, his fingers drumming a slow, heavy rhythm on the command console. Theoretically, he finally repeated, the word hanging in the air like a shroud. And the cost of this controlled catastrophe, the main reactor will be offline for approximately 3 minutes after every shot while the capacitors recharge, Eris admitted. During that time, we will be running on secondary power. No main thrusters, no FTL calculations, and no gun. We will be, for all intents and purposes, adrift in the dark. The Admiral's lips tightened into a thin line. So we get one shot, and if we miss, we're a dead-in-the-water target for an enemy that eats starships. Suddenly, a communications officer turned from her console, her face pale. Admiral, we have a signal. It's It's from New Magellan. What's left of it? The bridge fell silent. On the main screen, a distorted image appeared. It was a civilian distress call, routed through the collapsing colonial defense network. The video was a nightmare of failing physics. Buildings seemed to flow like liquid, their structures losing coherence. The sky was a sickening, shifting kaleidoscope of colors that didn't belong in nature. People weren't dying in explosions. They were simply fraying. Their bodies would flicker, becoming translucent, their edges blurring into the corrupted background. The audio was even worse, screams that stretched and warped, words that decayed into static midway through a syllable. And then, a single, clearer signal broke through for a few seconds. A face, pale and terrified, but instantly recognizable to Eris. His sister, Ilara. Her voice was a garbled whisper, twisted by the failing reality around her. Eris, if you can, the light, it sings. It's unmaking the sky. I'm sorry. The signal dissolved into a shriek of static and then died, replaced by the Concord's official red alert for a system undergoing total reality failure. The Ethel were not just destroying New Magellan, they were erasing it from the tapestry of space-time. Eris stood frozen, his hands clenched into fists, the sterile physics of his theory colliding with the horrifying, personal reality on the screen. He felt a hand on his shoulder, heavy and firm. It was Yorick. The Admiral's voice was low, stripped of its earlier skepticism, replaced by a cold, resonant fury. Chief Engineer, bring the main reactor to full power. Weapons Officer, begin loading procedures for the first slug. We are not waiting for the rest of the fleet. An officer looked up, stunned. Sir High Command. High Command can court-martial me after I'm done. Jorik snarled, his eyes never leaving the dead screen that had shown Ilara's last moments. We are humanity's only response. We are the primitive, reckless gamble, and we are going to show the Concord, the Ethel, and anyone else watching what happens when you push savages into a corner. Helm, plot a course to the Cygnus anomaly. Maximum possible jump. He turned to Eris, and for the first time, the scientist saw not a skeptic, but a believer. Or a believer in the brutal, beautiful simplicity of violence. Doctor, your theory is about to go live. Let's go throw some rocks. A deep, groaning shudder ran through the entire vessel as immense sections of the hull shifted, opening the forward aperture of the mass accelerator cannon. Power from the ship's core, a miniature star held in a magnetic cage, began to bleed into the weapon, and the lights on the bridge dimmed as the gun drank the ship's energy. The tungsten was not a ship with a weapon. It was a weapon that happened to be a ship. It was humanity's rage, smelted and forged into a colossal bullet, aimed at the heart of an incomprehensible god. As the star chart on the main display shifted, locking onto a destination deep in enemy territory, Eris Thorne knew that whatever happened next, the galaxy's perception of humanity was about to be fundamentally and irrevocably altered. They had been dismissed as primitives. Soon, they would be feared as monsters. The ship vibrated with contained power, a titan straining at its leash, and then, with a lurch that felt like the universe itself being torn, it jumped, leaving the cold, safe light of home far behind. The transition from hyperspace was not a clean snap back into reality. It was a tearing, a violent dragging of the tungsten through a membrane of sick physics. The ship groaned, not like stressed metal, but like a living thing in agony. On the bridge, Emergency lights flickered as the inertial dampeners struggled to compensate for a force they were never designed to handle. Space on the other side was not the familiar, serene black. It was bruised. The Cygnus anomaly was a maelstrom of corrupt light ahead of them, a swirling wound in the universe, but its influence extended for light years. The void itself seemed thick, viscous, and the distant stars, viewed through the ship's few armored sensors, did not twinkle. They appeared to weep, their light smeared and distorted as if seen through a pane of flawed, melting glass. Status. Jorik's voice was a solid anchor in the chaos. Helm. Report. Navigational lock is unstable, Admiral. The helmsman replied, his knuckles white on the console. Space-time metrics are fluctuating. It's like trying to navigate in a hurricane. We're holding position, but it's a fight. We're in their territory now, Eris Thorne murmured, his eyes wide as he stared at the sensor readings flooding his terminal. The data was nonsensical, a chaotic scream of quantum fluctuations and impossible energy signatures. The universe he had dedicated his life to understanding, a place of elegant laws and predictable constants, had been replaced by a canvas of divine madness. His grief for Alara was a cold, hard stone in his chest. But here, on the edge of the abyss, it was overshadowed by a primal, intellectual terror. He was a cartographer who had sailed off the edge of the map. Doctor, Yorick said, turning his gaze from the main viewer, you said the Ethel are drawn to complex energy. We are a fusion reactor strapped to a cannon, screaming through the void. They know we're here. Yes, Admiral, Eris confirmed, forcing his mind to focus. But they won't just attack. Their process is more insidious. They will assess, probe. They will listen to our technology before they begin to unsing it. Alara's word, unsing. It was a poet's description of a physics nightmare. He pulled up the ship's passive sensor logs, frantically modifying the filters, telling the system to ignore the expected and search for the impossible. He was looking for a pattern in the chaos, a signature in the noise. What my sister said in her last message, the light, it sings. And it wasn't a metaphor. The deconstruction wave has a resonant frequency, a complex, multi-layered harmonic that seems to be the carrier wave for the entropic effect. If I can isolate that frequency, I might be able to pinpoint the source, the nexus of the anomaly. Jorik nodded slowly. Find their heart, and we put a spike through it. Get to it. Doctor. As the tungsten pushed deeper into the corrupted space, they began to see the true scale of the Concorde's defeat. It was a graveyard with trees. The wreckage of the 5 fleets dispatched to contain the anomaly was scattered across millions of kilometers, a silent testament to the folly of elegant solutions. But it was the nature of the wreckage that chilled the bridge crew to the bone. The ships weren't blown apart, they were dissolved. A Kelmorian Star Weaver, identical to the one they'd seen destroyed on the Concorde's viewers, was a ghostly, crystalline skeleton, its intricate hull having evaporated, leaving behind only the densest, most fundamental support structures. A Selith battleship was a twisted, melted sculpture, its organic components unraveled into long, fibrous strands of inert carbon that drifted like seaweed in a dead ocean. They took the fire and left the stone, Yorick observed, his voice a low growl. They stripped them of every watt of energy, every complex system, and discarded the useless husks. They're filtering reality, Admiral, Eris said, his fingers flying across his console. He was getting something. Faint traces of the harmonic frequency were echoing off the dead ships. They consume the complex and ignore the simple. It's exactly as the model predicted. Our ship, We are anathema to them. We are a meal with no nutritional value, all stone and no fire. Let's hope they don't have strong teeth, the weapons officer muttered from her station. Her name was Commander Valerius, a woman with a sharp, hawkish face and a reputation for cold precision. She was overseeing the final arming sequences of the Mac. Capacitors are at 90%, Admiral. The slug is chambered. The stasis field is stable. The gun will be ready to fire on your command. The ship was a coiled spring of immense, terrible power. The air on the bridge hummed, the deck plates vibrating with the contained energy of a sun waiting to be unleashed down the ship's spine. Every crew member felt it, a low-level thrum that vibrated in their bones, a constant reminder of the catastrophic power they were commanding. In the ship's engineering core, a space the size of a cathedral, filled with the raw, brutal architecture of the fusion reactor. Chief Engineer Locke and his team worked in heavy radiation suits, their movements precise and economical. They weren't coaxing a delicate system. They were wrestling with a caged god. Coolant pumps the size of buildings cycled super-chilled helium around the magnetic containment field, while plasma injectors fed raw hydrogen into the reactor's hungry heart. The power being diverted to the Mac was so immense that the reactor itself was under a strain it had only ever endured in simulations. One miscalculation, one containment flicker, and the tungsten wouldn't just be destroyed, it would become a short-lived, very bright star. Locke's voice, filtered through his suit's comms, was calm, but the sweat beading on his forehead was visible through his faceplate. Bridge, engineering, reactor core is stable, but the feedback from the capacitor banks is significant. The gun is hungry. Admiral, I suggest we feed it soon. Acknowledged, Chief, Yorick replied. Stand by. His eyes were locked on Eris. The physicist was pale, his face illuminated by the glow of his screen. He was lost to the world, chasing ghosts in the machine. Doctor, I need a target, Yorick pressed, his voice firm but not unkind. I have one, Iris whispered, his voice filled with a terrible awe. He magnified a section of the main viewer. At first, it looked like an empty patch of the corrupted void, but as Eris applied his new frequency filters, a shape began to resolve within the chaos. It was not a ship. It was not a creature. It was a structure, a knot in the fabric of space-time, a place where the laws of physics were being actively and maliciously rewritten. It was a shimmering, multi-dimensional vortex of light and shadow, and at its center was a point of absolute silence, a perfect sphere of blackness that seemed to absorb all light, all energy, all reality. The deconstruction harmonics were pouring from it like a flood. That's it, Eris breathed. The nexus, the heart. It's not just broadcasting the song, it is the song. It's the source of the entire anomaly. The sphere of blackness pulsed, and a fresh wave of distortion rippled through space. On the bridge, a bank of secondary consoles flickered and died, their delicate electronics instantly fried. A hairline crack appeared on the Admiral's coffee mug, which then silently crumbled into a fine gray dust. The Ethel had noticed them. It's probing us, Commander Valeria stated, her voice tight. The outer hull is registering direct contact with the deconstruction field. Report, Yorick commanded. Minor surface ablation. Admiral, a damage control officer called out. The first few molecular layers of the plating are flaking, but the composite underneath is holding. The energy dispersal is working. It's like the wave is washing over us and finding nothing to hold on to. Eris watched his sensor feeds with a terrifying vindication. His theory was holding. The tungsten was enduring. It was sitting in the heart of a storm that had unmade fleets, and its armor was shrugging it off. But the subtle, relentless pressure was growing. The ship began to shudder, a low, constant vibration as the Ethel's song tried to find a crack, a flaw, a single complex system it could begin to unravel. "It's trying to find a way in," Yorick said. "It's learning. We don't have time for a second shot. Valerius, I want a direct firing solution on the center of that black sphere. Aye, Admiral, targeting, now." The space-time distortion is making it difficult to maintain a lock. The ship gave a violent lurch, and this time, the lights went out, plunging the bridge into the red glow of emergency power. "Secondary power is failing," an engineer shouted over the comm. "The field is getting stronger. Valerius," Yorick roared. "I have a lock," she confirmed, her voice straining. "It's unstable, but it's there. Helm, hold us steady. I don't care how you do it, engineering. Give me everything you have left for the gun." Yorick stood like a statue in the crimson gloom, his face set. The primitive, reckless gamble was here. One shot to save their species. He looked at Aerie, who was staring at the Nexus with an expression of pure, unadulterated hatred. This was for Alara. This was for New Magellan. This was for every terrified soul that had frayed into nothingness. This was humanity's ugly, brutal, and profoundly physical answer. "On my mark, Commander," Yorick said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying across the entire bridge. The ship screamed around them as it fought against the unmaking of reality. "Targeting solution is locked. Capacitors are fully charged. The cannon is ready, Admiral." Mark. The universe held its breath. There was no grand countdown, no ceremonial preamble. Yorick's single word, "Mark," was the only catalyst needed. Commander Valerius's hand, already poised over the firing stud, came down with surgical precision. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The bridge remained steeped in the hellish red of emergency lighting, the ship continuing its violent shuddering against the Ethel's entropic song. The crew held a collective breath, a sliver of doubt piercing their adrenaline-fueled focus. And then, the tungsten fired. It was not a sound. It was a feeling. It was a sensation of profound, instantaneous void, as if every ounce of energy, heat, and vibration on the ship had been inhaled by the cannon in a single greedy gasp. The lights didn't just flicker. They died, extinguished by the sudden, absolute power drain. For a fraction of a second, the bridge was plunged into a perfect, silent blackness, the only sensation being a gut-wrenching lurch as the ship's artificial gravity faltered. Eris Thorn felt his stomach try to climb into his throat. He was a creature of physics, and his every instinct screamed that what had just occurred was a violation of natural law. 1,000 suns' worth of energy had just been focused and expelled from a man-made object. Then came the recoil. The inertial dampeners, already screaming under the strain of the corrupted space-time, momentarily gave way. The entire 200-million-ton vessel was shoved backward by the ghost of the force it had unleashed. A brutal, bone-jarring slam that threw anyone not strapped down against the nearest bulkhead. Alarms, deadened by the power drain, began to shriek back to life, a discordant symphony of failure and warning. On the main viewer, which flickered back to life on restored auxiliary power, a new star was born. The 20-ton slug, encased in its collapsing stasis bubble and moving at a speed that made a mockery of distance, was not visible as an object. It was a line of pure force, a white-hot needle stitching a new, violent reality onto the bruised canvas of the anomaly. The space-time between the tungsten and the Nexus, distorted and sick as it was, didn't have time to react. The projectile was a physical absolute, an event so fundamental it simply overrode the ethel's quantum manipulations. It was not a weapon, it was a truth, and that truth was about to be delivered. The impact was an event of silent, cosmic violence. There was no explosion of light and fire, for the Nexus was a thing that consumed such energies. Instead, when the slug met the sphere of perfect blackness, it was like a hammer striking a flawless crystal bell the size of a moon. The effect was not an explosion, but a resonance. A single, pure, physical shock wave erupted from the point of impact. It was not a wave of energy, but a wave of pure, unadulterated reality. A ripple of stable physics propagated outwards, a cleansing fire of cosmic law. Where the wave passed, the corrupt light of the anomaly flickered in and died. The weeping stars snapped back into sharp, clear points of light. The bruised, viscous quality of space vanished, replaced by the crisp, clean black of the normal universe. The ethel song, the multi-layered harmonic of deconstruction, faltered. Its complex melody collapsed into a single, screeching note of dissonant agony, and then fell silent. The oppressive, mind-numbing pressure on the tungsten vanished so suddenly it felt like a physical weight had been lifted from the ship and its crew. The violent shuddering ceased. The constant, insidious attempt to unmake them was simply gone. On the bridge, a collective gasp of disbelief rippled through the crew. They stared at the main viewer, where the Nexus, the heart of the ethel's power, was dying. The sphere of blackness was fractured, spiderweb cracks of pure light spreading across its surface. It was not exploding, it was shattering. It was a broken idea, a failed equation. It pulsed one last time, a final, silent scream, and then it imploded, collapsing in on itself and vanishing from existence, leaving behind nothing but a serene, blessedly empty patch of space. Silence reigned on the bridge of the tungsten. It was a profound, ringing silence, the kind that follows a cataclysm. The crew, moments before fighting for their very existence, now found themselves adrift in a calm, quiet graveyard. Jorek stood unmoving, his knuckles white where he gripped the command console, his gaze locked on the place where the enemy had been. His voice, when he finally spoke, was rough, raw. "Damage report." The spell was broken. The bridge crew, trained to perfection, snapped back into action, their movements crisp despite their exhaustion and shock. Reports began to flood in. "Main reactor is offline. Admiral, beginning the recharge sequence. Estimated 3 minutes to minimum power. Secondary power systems are a mess. We're running on emergency batteries on decks G through M. Hull integrity is at 92%. We took a lot of surface damage, but nothing penetrated the main armor. She held. Admiral, the old girl actually held. Life support is stable. No casualties on the bridge." Eris Thorn leaned heavily against his console, his legs feeling weak. He looked at his sensor feeds, which were now displaying beautifully, blessedly boring data. Stable gravitational constants, predictable background radiation, normal space-time. He had been right. The sledgehammer had worked. He had thrown a rock at a god, and the god had broken. The relief was so immense it was physically painful, but it was followed swiftly by a cold, sobering thought. He had just provided his species with the ultimate weapon. He, a man who had wanted to study the stars, had just taught humanity how to kill them. Commander Valerius let out a long, slow breath. "Target eliminated. "Admiral," she said, her voice betraying a hint of awe for the first time. "Whatever that thing was, it's gone." Yorick finally turned from the viewer, his stormy eyes surveying his bridge, his crew. He gave a single, curt nod. "It's gone," he agreed. "But we are adrift in the heart of what was their territory, with our main gun offline. This fight isn't over." As if on cue, the long-range sensor officer looked up from his console, his face grim. "Admiral, I'm picking up Concord signatures. A lot of them." On the tactical display, dozens of new contacts appeared at the edge of the sensor range. They weren't the disorganized, fleeing remnants of the first 5 fleets. This was a new deployment, a massive one, sleek, iridescent cruisers of the Kelmorians, towering, organic battleships of the Silith, and at their center, a vessel whose energy signature dwarfed all others, a conquered command spire, a mobile headquarters, Lyra Ventari. They hadn't come to help. They had come to watch. "They were waiting," Yorick growled, a dangerous light entering his eyes. "They sat back and let us take the risk. They waited to see if the primitives would die, or if our insane weapon would actually work." A communication channel opened, unrequested. It was the Prime Arbiter, Lyra Ventari. Its telepathic voice, once cool and dismissive, now carried a new, unfamiliar tone. It was not mockery. It was something far colder. Fear. Human Vessel T. D. S. Tungsten. You have deployed an unsanctioned weapon of catastrophic potential. By the laws of the Concordance, you are to stand down immediately. Power down all remaining systems and prepare to be boarded. Your vessel and its weapon are to be confiscated under the Galactic Arms Treaty. Eris felt a surge of cold fury. Confiscated. After they had just saved the periphery, after they had succeeded where the entire might of the conquered had failed, Yorick let out a short, sharp bark of laughter that was utterly devoid of humor. "Confiscated," he repeated, savoring the word like a bad taste. He stepped up to the comm station. "Open a channel. All ship broadcast. I want them to hear my voice, not some sanitized translation." He leaned into the microphone, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that was broadcast across the void. "Prime Arbiter Lyra Ventari. This is Admiral Yorick of the Terran vessel Tungsten. Let me be perfectly clear. My main gun is offline for another 90 seconds. In 91 seconds, it will be reloaded and ready to fire. You can view our recent engagement as a field test, a proof of concept, and I can assure you, the concept has been proven." He paused, letting the threat hang in the silent space between the fleets. "We are not powering down. We are not being boarded. And if any of your pretty, elegant ships cross that line," he gestured to a newly drawn demarcation on the tactical map, "we will demonstrate just how effective our primitive weapon is against targets that don't eat reality for breakfast. You wanted to see what savages do in the dark. Arbiter, stay where you are, or you're about to get a much closer look." He cut the channel, leaving his ultimatum hanging in the void. On the bridge of the Tungsten, there was a new kind of silence, not of shock, but of grim resolve. They had faced the unknowable and won. Now, they faced the known, the civilized, the galaxy that had mocked and abandoned them. Eris looked at the tactical display, the lone, ugly, brutalist ship of humanity, scarred and battered, surrounded by a fleet of the most advanced and powerful vessels in the galaxy, and all of them were afraid. They were afraid of the rock, 70 seconds until the gun is operational, Admiral, Commander Valerius reported, her voice as steady as steel. Yorick nodded, his eyes fixed on the Concorde fleet. The next 70 seconds, he said softly, will decide the future of our species. The 70 seconds that followed Yorick's ultimatum were the longest in the history of the Terran Confederacy. On the bridge of the Tungsten, the only sounds were the quiet hum of recharging capacitors and the steady, rhythmic pings of the tactical clock counting down to 0. Every eye was fixed on the main viewer, on the silent, glittering wall of the Concorde fleet. They were a breathtaking sight, a collection of the galaxy's finest artistic and technological achievements, each vessel a masterpiece of elegant lethality. They held their position, a silent, unified testament to a power that had, until an hour ago, been absolute. Commander Valerius kept one hand resting near the Mac firing stud, her posture relaxed but ready. The crew, exhausted and running on fumes, showed no fear, only a grim, unified resolve. They were the crew of the ugliest, most brutal ship in the galaxy, and in that moment, they had never been prouder. Eris Thorn watched the countdown, his mind a whirlwind. He had created a weapon that held 100,000 years of galactic evolution hostage. He had given Admiral Yorick the power to shatter this beautiful, ancient fleet into incandescent dust. The thought filled him not with pride, but with a profound and aching sorrow. He had wanted to give humanity a shield, but he had forged a sword so terrible that its very existence would forever define them. 30 seconds, Valerius announced, her voice a calm ripple in the tense silence. The Concorde fleet remained motionless. Eris realized they were not preparing to attack. They were calculating. Lyra Ventari and the collective minds of the Concorde were processing this new, impossible variable. They were a civilization of grandmasters at a complex, three-dimensional chess game, and humanity had just overturned the board and threatened to beat them to death with it. They were not warriors in the human sense. They were strategists, and they were facing a strategy so crude, so direct, that it broke every rule of their sophisticated game. It was the strategy of the cornered animal, mutually assured destruction. 10 seconds, Valerius said. Capacitors at 99%. The gun is hot. Admiral? Yorick did not flinch. His gaze never left the Concorde command spire, a shimmering needle of light at the heart of the fleet. He was engaged in a battle of wills with a being of pure energy, and he was not going to be the first to blink. 5, 4, 3, 2. At the 1-second mark, the Concorde's communication channel opened again. Lyra Ventari's telepathic voice filled the bridge. It was devoid of all previous emotion, no arrogance, no fear, only the cold, clear logic of a machine that had finished a complex calculation and arrived at an unavoidable answer. Admiral Yorick, your point is absolute. A pause, as if the concept itself was difficult for the ancient being to articulate. The Galactic Concorde has always operated on the principle of proportional response and the preservation of complex life. Your weapon makes a proportional response impossible. Any engagement would result in a level of destruction that is strategically illogical. We are not barbarians who trade empires for rubble. On the main viewer, the closest Kelmorian cruiser, a ship that looked more like a liquid jewel than a war machine, gracefully turned, its drives flaring with soft, ethereal light. Then another, and another. The entire Concorde fleet, in a single, synchronized, and beautiful maneuver, began to withdraw. There was no chaotic retreat, only an orderly, deliberate disengagement. It was the most dignified surrender in galactic history. The Terran Confederacy is hereby redesignated Lyra Ventari's voice continued, a final, chilling decree. You are no longer a rogue state. Your existence has been recontextualized from this day forward. Terran-controlled space is designated a quarantine zone under the title of the Shear. No conquered vessel shall enter. No trade will be conducted. You are contained. We will not risk our reality by engaging with yours. You have your territory, Admiral. We trust you will remain within it. The last of the conquered ships, the command spire itself, shimmered and then dissolved into the non-space of hyperspace, leaving the tungsten alone in the silent, clean dark. The threat was gone. The war was over. For a long moment, the bridge crew stood in stunned silence, the release of tension so profound it was almost a physical blow. Then, a single technician in the back let out a ragged, whooping cheer. It was an infectious sound, and in seconds, the bridge erupted in a wave of triumphant, exhausted shouts. Men and women embraced, laughing, some openly weeping with relief. They had done it. The primitives, the savages, the joke of the galaxy, had stared down the gods and made them blink. Yorick stood impassive through it all, waiting for the celebration to subside. When it finally did, he turned, his face carved from stone. "Helm," he said, his voice cutting through the remaining emotion. "Take us home." It was over. The long journey back to the Sol system was a quiet one. The tungsten, scarred and weary, limped home, a conquering hero that looked like a scrapyard dog. News of their victory and the subsequent galactic quarantine had preceded them. They were not met with ticker-tape parades, but with a somber, awestruck silence. Humanity was safe, but it was now utterly alone. An island nation in a cosmic ocean that had declared its shores too dangerous to visit. Days later, in the grand chamber of the conquered spire on Xylos, the delegates of 100 civilizations gathered once more. The mood was not one of mockery or panic, but of a deep, unsettling reverence. In the center of the hall, the holographic display no longer showed the ethel anomaly. It showed a star chart with a single system, the Sol system, cordoned off in a stark, cautionary red, labeled with its new, official designation. Lyra Ventari floated at the center of the chamber, its crystalline form pulsing with a slow, contemplative light. A delegate from a species that had not spoken in centuries, a being of pure thought, projected a question into the silent space. "Arbiter, what have they become?" Lyra Ventari's response was not for the chamber, but for the galaxy, a final entry into a history that had just been violently rewritten. They have become a new fundamental law of the universe. For millennia, we believed that the ultimate path to power was through complexity, through elegance, through the mastery of energy and reality itself. The humans have taught us a terrible lesson. They have shown us that there is a power that lies beyond complexity. It is the power of the absolute, the power of a simple, undeniable, physical truth. The Arbiter paused, and every mind in the conquered felt the weight of its final words. We called them primitives because they fought with mass and velocity. We failed to realize that in a universe of intricate locks, the most effective key is, and always has been, a hammer. They are not the slingshot civilization. They are the shear, and they have cut our elegant reality down to a brutal, undeniable size. The age of gods is over. The age of monsters has begun. On the bridge of the T-S, Tungsten, now docked in the silent dark of the Kuiper Belt, Eris Thorne stood alone, looking at the schematics of the mass accelerator cannon. He had done it. He had saved them. He had avenged his sister. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his soul, that humanity had not so much won a war as it had lost its place in the universe. They were no longer striving to join the elegant dance of the cosmos. They were the reason the music had stopped. They were safe. They were sovereign. They were feared. And they were, now and forever, utterly and completely alone in the dark.